Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. It is the 8th of November and we're in that final stretch for 2020. As always, if this is useful, please go ahead and give this a like, subscribe, comment and share. Actually, a fairly quiet week in terms of updates. New videos, I posted part 10 of the Azure Masterclass. This was all around monitoring and then how we can take some of that monitoring data and actually apply it to security. And then I gave a talk at a user group actually about Azure networking. It's about 40 minutes long. So I just recorded that and I uploaded that as well. So if you want a shorter than my regular kind of Azure network talks, you can go and check that out. Okay, so new features. Actually, a bunch of things around Azure Batch. Remember, Azure Batch is all about the idea that, hey, I can have these pool of compute resources and I can give it jobs, some process to perform. Generally, it's fairly large scale. So there's now a required slots property for tasks. And this is really all about the idea that I may have kind of different node pools with different capabilities. And I have certain levels of requirements for different size jobs. So what I can now do is I can set this property to say, well, how many scheduling slots does this particular job need that makes up the task on the particular nodes? And then on the nodes, I have a similar unit to say, well, this is how many scheduling slots this node has. So it helps me align kind of the resource requirements of my particular task with what's possible on the nodes that make up that node pool. And the slot properties that I can define on the nodes is really based on the number of virtual cores it has. So it can be up to 4 times the number of cores or 256, whichever is smaller. Now we've got private endpoints for Azure Batch as well. There is now a pool node disk encryption option in preview. So this can apply to kind of both the OS disk and the temporary disk. So I can use this for just a complete encryption of the OS instances that make up my Azure Batch environment. And I can also turn off public IP. And for the assets that belong to the Azure Batch environment. So I have an account and I could think about, well, there's certificates, there might be task command lines, there might be environment variables. So all those things are encrypted and it previously was only with a system managed key. Well, I can actually now go in and say, hey, I want to use my own key, a customer managed key. And we can kind of see these things. So if we jump over to the portal quickly, so if in here, I actually I'll go home, and we can actually go and look at a Azure Batch account. So we can actually see a few different things from the Batch account. So firstly, we have this encryption option. So this, remember, was around the account's assets, those certificates, command lines, environment variables, whatever. Well, I can now change it to a customer managed key. Now I could go and select it from a vault, same as we can always do with anything related to bring my own key. We're storing it in Azure Key Vault. But now when I create a pool, we have these additional options. So we have this disk encryption now configuration. And here we can select, well, what do I want to encrypt? Is it the OS disk, the temporary disk, or the OS and temporary disk? So I can do those additional levels of encryption. And likewise, I can now turn off all the way at the bottom the idea of having a public IP address to my batch environment. So we have a whole bunch of new capabilities all around Azure Batch. So when you think about turning off the public IP and the new private endpoint capabilities, I can create these completely isolated batch environments. Speaking of which, HDInsight now has private link support as well in preview. So HDInsight are those managed clusters built around kind of the Hadoop, my MapReduce, my Spark, my Kafka, my Hive, my IQ, all these different types of cluster, generally for this kind of big data analysis, for this transformation. So once again, now with HDInsight and that private link support, I can now create that private cluster and actually go and integrate with other types of services. I can have a fully isolated cluster. I can have internal standard load balancers now. It can then have private endpoints to other services. From a storage perspective, Azure Files now has soft delete. So if we think about, remember, soft delete is that idea that, hey, when I go and actually delete, in this case, the share itself, it won't actually delete it straight away. I'll actually be able to go back and restore that share. So this is different from the content. So this is actually at the share level. So if we jump over, if I go and actually look at a storage account, and we go and look at our Azure Files, well, we can see under File Services now, we actually have this soft delete option. So I can actually go to soft delete, and it's turned on, and I can say, well, how long to actually keep it for? By default, 7 days. So now if I actually go and look at my file shares, we'll see on the right-hand side, show deleted shares. So with that turned on, I could now say, hey, actually show me the deleted ones. I'd be able to see it and actually restore that content. Now again, this is different from restoring a deleted file or a folder within the share. For that, we still use kind of snapshots. So here you can see operations. I have snapshots on the side, and I can see, hey, I took a snapshot. I could automate the creation of these snapshots using things like Azure Backup to orchestrate these snapshot creations. I could go and add a new one right now. But I could actually go and select that snapshot, and this is how I could actually go and restore individual items or folders. So that soft delete is at the share level. I delete the share, I want to bring the share back. If I want to restore files or folders, well, this is where we use the snapshot capability that, again, I can trigger through Azure Backup. And I'm using the portal here, but I could also use things like previous versions tab through things like Explorer if I'm mapped to these shares. So that same capability exists there. Then Azure Backup itself actually now has a soft delete option for SQL Server running in VMs and SAP HANA running in virtual machines. Now, for the Azure Files soft delete, I would still be paying for the cost of that share. So the content of the share, if I keep it for 7 days, I'm still paying for it for the kind of 7 days. With this Azure Backup soft delete, I actually don't pay for it. If I turn this on, it's going to retain it for 14 days, but I don't actually pay for that retained 14 days. To turn this on, this is a feature of my Recovery Services Vault. So once again, I can jump over to here. I'll go and look at a vault. And under the vault, what we're actually going to look at here is under settings, we have the properties. Under the properties, we actually have security settings. And then here is where I can turn, enable or disable actually for the soft delete. And where this is so powerful is if we think about, hey, there was some compromise, some attack. Someone infiltrated our environment and actually went and deleted all of our backups. So with this soft delete, even if they went and deleted our backups, we can go and get them back. So there's a way for us to go and actually bring it back even though they did that delete option. AWS Gen 2 now has a recursive ACL update capability. So remember, AWS Gen 2 sits on top of Blob, but it adds a hierarchical file system, which is super important for big data that want to do like move operations that you can't do with a flat structure like objects because it's part of the file name, and I have to do a copy delete on blobs to change the name. Has POSIX compatible security, etc. And so the ACLs, they always got inherited from the parent, but if I change the parent, it didn't change the children. I'd have to go and manually update those children. So now there's operations for PowerShell, CLI, REST, etc. that I can update the ACL of kind of the parent object, like the folder, and it will automatically get applied to all of the child items. So the files, the items actually within the folder. And miscellaneous, Azure Monitor for containers actually now has network configuration support. So network configuration for containers, AKS, is really about micro-segmentation between containers. It's like network security groups, but whereas network security groups are about micro-segmentation for virtual machines, network configurations are all about micro-segmentation between pods. I can have IP sets and groups and rules. Well, now with this monitoring capability, it will show me things like the overall complexity of that configuration, the number of policies, the rules, the set counts I have over time, a number of entries, number of IP sets, and kind of my performance. So now I have that ability to hook in and see that data. Azure Migrate now has a PowerShell module. So Azure Migrate is fantastic for doing that discovery, that assessment, and the migration, but I'm kind of doing it all through the portal. So there's a certain amount of slowness that's inherent to that. So now there's actually an az.migrate PowerShell module that I can now just automate. I can now really enable these large-scale migration activities by using that PowerShell module. App Insights for Java 3.0 is now available. So what this means, this is all about kind of a codeless attach. I don't have to compile any kind of App Insights SDK into my app. Now I can literally just install the App Insights agent on that VM, that on-premises instance, that container. It really doesn't matter. And I can do a codeless attach. So it's going to auto-instrument the application to now send that telemetry, the data, to App Insights. So it can give me information about the performance of my application, the dependencies, and all without changing anything about the code. So Java 3.0, I can now do that codeless attach. And then Azure Security Center has the October updates. So a number of new capabilities. I can do things like turn off certain compliance things that I just don't care about. So I'll have the link in the description. You can go and check out kind of what's new in Security Center. And this isn't actually brand new now, but it's something I hadn't really caught. And it's application change analysis. It's actually kind of a cool thing. So we have the Azure Resource Graph. The Azure Resource Graph is this great capability to sub-second get information at the Azure Resource Manager level about really kind of any resource. So what they've actually now done is they're tracking when changes happen at that Azure Resource Graph level, and they're going to expose it to us using this new application change analysis. So how many times have you gone and done a few things and then something breaks and you're really not sure, well, what changed and why did it break? So you can see what this is doing is it's quickly going through. It does 10 apps at a time, and I can go through pages. There's pages here at the bottom. But here I can see very quickly, well, okay, so for this app, this function, there's one change at a certain time. Okay, well, this function, there's 2 changes. I could maybe go and select this function, and it's going to show me what the actual properties are. So I can say, okay, the current stack changed from .NET to PowerShell. Well, that might be kind of a strange thing. Maybe that's what's breaking my application. So I can quickly kind of see those things. If I actually go and let's look at another page, trying to find out another change that's happened recently. Here we go, this one. So I know this has got a change. So it's got 10 changes. So if I select this one, well, here I can see, okay, well, SKU name. So here I could say, oh, look, the SKU name changed from standard GRS to standard RAGRS. So it gives me that ability to actually go through and see what's actually changed about my Azure resources. That's actually super, super cool. So for the Azure resource, the ARM level, it's pretty quick. For things like my actual app deployment, I think it updates every 4 hours. So there'll be a little bit of a delay. But this is really a great way now to just go and plug in. It doesn't cost me anything. I can just go and plug in and see, well, what's kind of changed in my Azure environment. So that's it. I hope this was useful. As always, take care of yourselves. And until next week, stay safe.